My name is Bill Casner, and racing has been a major part of my life since 1963. Rarely has there been an issue in our industry that has been this contentious as the one on Lasix. Both camps are adamant in their stances, and both are dug in. I would suspect that there will be a number of people in the room today that will not like my stance on this issue, but at the end of the day, my allegiance is to the horse and to our industry. So I'm willing to take my hits. All of us are a product of our experiences. There are few trainers in this room, or owners for that matter, that have ever run a horse in a jurisdiction that did not allow race day Lasix. As a result, it has been a common practice for virtually every horse in every race, including 2-year-old first-time starters, to be given this medication. And the question is why? I think it can be broken down into two basic reasons. One, most trainers feel that the vast majority of their horses bleed and that the horses will not perform up to its potential if it does bleed. Two, most owners and trainers believe that Lasix is performance enhancing and that they will lose a competitive advantage if it is not administered. The belief goes beyond its therapeutic benefit to truly believing that it enhances performance. As I said, we are all products of our experience, and I would like to speak to what I have experienced with and without Lasix. I was a career racetracker until I was 31 years old. I galloped horses, worked on the starting gate, was an assistant trainer, and for the last 6 years, trained a small stable of horses. Mine were mains and tails, and I averaged anywhere from 15 to 20 horses. I was one of the little guys. My wife ran the shed row, she cleaned stalls, she walked hots. Purses were small, and what we made was basically from our own labor and from pieces of horses that we owned a part of. We put in 100-hour work weeks, just like so many of you do out there in this audience. The only reason I mention this is to establish that I am speaking as someone who depended on my horses and their performance for my living. It was the best education I could have ever had, and when I left the racetrack and went into the other world outside the stable gate, everything else I have done in business has been easy in comparison. During my 6 years as a trainer, Lasix only started to become a permitted medication in a few jurisdictions. Chicago allowed it in the last years I was training in 1978 and 79. Very few horses ran on it at that time. A horse had to have been witnessed by the state vet to have bled from his nose before it could run on it. In that time, I only had one horse that ran with it. All the rest ran without it. Everyone in that era, including myself, had their horses on a 2-week run schedule, and you ran back the following week if the race came up in the book. Purses were a lot smaller in comparison than today's, and the economics demanded that we run our horses often. The goal was to have 18 to 20 starts per year per horse. Horses did just fine on that schedule. We trained lighter and ran more often. In the 6 years I trained, I only had one horse that visibly bled from the nose. This was an era before the advent of the flexible endoscope, so we didn't know if horses were bleeding internally or not. Maybe some of them were and we didn't know it. Bottom line, horses ran more often, and they ran just as true to form as horses do in this day and age. The data shows that horses today average 6 races a year as compared to 12 in the 1960s. During that earlier era, in the 70s, we had 3 Triple Crown winners in the span of 7 years. Since the inception of Lasix, we have not had one. It has been 33 years. Why is that? Could there be a correlation? You hear a lot of people saying that 3 races in 5 weeks is too taxing on horses and that races should be spread out. It didn't seem to bother Secretariat, Affirmed, or Seattle Slew. I wanted to understand what the impact of Lasix was on my horses, so I bought 2 sets of scales, one for the horses running in California and one for the horses on the East Coast. I've always felt that a set of scales was one of the most useful tools available in evaluating a horse's condition. We installed one in every barn at Windstar Farm and have used it on a regular basis to weigh foals, yearlings, broodmares, and our training horses. and weighing horses is a window to their health. Owen Hardy trains my horses, and we have had numerous conversations about Lasix and its therapeutic benefits and its potential side effects. And it's a cold, hard fact that every medication has side effects along with its therapeutic benefits. And if you don't believe me, just listen to the commercials on television, and you will hear a litany of side effects rattled off that make you wonder why anybody would want to even take those drugs. Owen comes from a European background, trained horses in Dubai for Sheikh Mohammed. He trained well armed to win the Dubai World Cup and was an assistant to Bob Baffert when Silver Charm won it. So running horses without Lasix was something that he had experienced. I asked him what he thought of trying our 2-year-olds without Lasix. He said he was certainly game to try it. After putting the scales in his barn, weighing horses has become a routine with the assistant trainers. And it's not just my horses, it's all of the horses in his barn. Here is what we have experienced with the weights of horses running with and without Lasix. Horses running on Lasix with a dosage of 3 to 5 cc's that are weighed the morning after a race will have lost anywhere from 25 to 100 pounds. And you heard that correctly, 100 pounds. We ran a big Tisnow filly at Arlington Park. She was given 3 cc's of Lasix pre-race. She won the race, cooled out, drank several buckets of water after the race and that night. The next morning when she was walked across the scale, she was 100 pounds lighter, and it took her 4 weeks to gain it back. This was the most that a horse has ever lost that we have weighed. Most will lose anywhere from 25 to 50 pounds when weighed the morning after. We have always heard that horses will urinate up to 25 pounds pre-race, which may be accurate, but Lasix continues to have a diuretic effect post-race, and combining it with the stress of the race in a hot day, you can lose a heck of a lot more than 25 pounds. The literature says that IV Lasix lasts 2 to 4 hours, with IM intramuscular lasting 6 hours. It is detectable in the urine up to 72 hours. I suspect that the diuretic effect continues well into the night. And I want you to remember that a gallon of water weighs 8 pounds, and if a horse drinks a full bucket, 5 gallons, that's 40 pounds. If he consumes 2.5 buckets after he's run between the race and the next morning, that's 100 pounds of water that he has consumed post-race. Yet in the morning, he's still substantially behind the weight curve even after drinking that much water. The time it took for these horses to recover the weight loss was anywhere from 5 days to 5 weeks. Remember, this was on Lasix dosages of 3 to 5 cc's, and we all know that it's not uncommon for some trainers to administer up to 10 cc's of Lasix. And it would be real interesting to understand what the weight losses are in those horses. And what about the horses that we have run to date without Lasix? This year we have 23 starts with 7 wins, 5 seconds, and 2/3. Of those starts, we have a track record at Gulfstream going 1 mile and 1/16 and a grade 3 win. We also have 2 horses that have placed in grade 2 races. Out of those 23 starts, we have had 2 horses that have bled, less than 10%. One of those horses that bled won at odds of 65 to 1 and ran 12 points higher on her buyer than she had ever run before and bled a 2 of 5. And I want to repeat that. She ran 12 points higher. She went off at 65 to 1, paid $125, probably didn't even belong in the race, bled 2 of 5 and still won. We had another horse that ran a very, very close second that bled a 1 of 5. And this has led me to the conclusion that perhaps bleeding doesn't stop these horses like we have always presumed that it did. What we have really observed post-race that these horses pulled up very well, they were in the tub, and the next morning they had lost negligible weight. Most of the time they'll only lose 5 to 10 pounds, and they're feeling good and they're ready to go back to the racetrack after a day or 2. Perhaps we start to understand why trainers of today's era have put their horses on a 4 to 5 week race schedule, sometimes 6 weeks. The term bounce was one that was coined by the Sheets guys in the mid-90s to describe a non-effort after a horse that ran a big race. This term was not around in an earlier time when horses ran often because they could. Trainers then are no different than today's trainers. They figure out how much time it takes for a horse to recover from a race and they adjust. In the days before Lasix, trainers had no problem running their horses every 2 weeks and sometimes back in the next week. We are all certainly familiar with Conquistador Cielo, who won the Met Mile by 7 lengths against older horses, track record time, and then came back in 6 days and won the Belmont Stakes by 14 lengths. Citation ran 9 times as a 2-year-old, winning 8 times. As a 3-year-old, he ran 20 times in the span of 10 months, winning 19 races and running second in the other, an average of nearly 1 start for every 2 weeks. 29 starts before the end of his 3-year-old year with 27 victories. These are just two of the great ones. We could go on and on listing the campaigns of so many great horses that ran often and ran big. And do any of us in the room today really believe that the horses of an earlier era could have done what they have done and ran as often as they had run if they had been given Lasix before each and every race and worked on it? But you can bet one thing, if Citation had been in the barn of 99.9% of the trainers in America today, he would be running on Lasix. While I was doing my due diligence on Lasix, I went to the manufacturer's website, and here are the side effects that were listed. Feeling weak, drowsy, restless, or dizzy. Fast or uneven heart rate. Muscle pain or weakness. And listen to this one. This is the most interesting potential side effect. Easy bruising or bleeding. Could chronic use of Lasix lend to bleeding? I think that's a question that needs to be asked. I understand that side effects are not always demonstrated, but some obviously are, or they would not be listed. I've also heard some people say that Lasix does not affect horses negatively like it affects humans. All you have to do is observe the number of horses that are in distress post-race, especially on hot days, to know that Lasix is extremely hard on these horses metabolically. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm more holier than the next guy. In my partnership in WinStar, we have won the Kentucky Derby, Belmont, Travers, the Don, the Haskell, and many other major stakes races, and those horses all ran on Lasix. I did win the Dubai World Cup with Well Armed without it, and he ran the race of his life, won by 14 lengths. The fact is, I have been no different than almost everyone else in this room today. I have always believed that Lasix was a necessary medication. It wasn't until we started weighing horses that I really began to understand how much it had to be stressing them. When we understand how much fluid these horses are actually losing, we began to figure out why it takes them so long to recover from their races and why we see horses heat stroking on hot days. The world has changed since Y2K. The world no longer has any tolerance for medication in the world of competitive sports. The World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, of which the International Olympics Committee, the IOC, is a member of, lists Lasix as a banned medication due to its alleged use as a masking agent for other drugs. It doesn't matter if it is or isn't. It's perceived as a masking agent, and that's the reality. Most trainers and vets believe that Lasix is performance enhancing. Doesn't matter if it is or it isn't. The fact is that it's perceived as performance enhancing, and that's the reality. There is zero tolerance by the public for medication in sports. Some people in America view it as an abuse to animals, and that is absolutely a crying shame because we all know that there is no better cared for animal on this planet than the racehorse. But perception is reality. I have learned one very important thing in business. If you do not have a vision of the changing landscape in your business, you are destined for decline and eventual failure. I don't think there is anyone in this audience today that would argue that we are not in a state of decline. The medication issue is but one of our many problems, but it is an important one and is something we can control. I believe that the path that has been charted by the American Graded Stakes Committee, the Breeders' Cup, and the state of Kentucky of banning race day meds, also known as Lasix, on 2-year-olds is the right way to go. No doubt, most trainers are going to be terrified to have Lasix taken away from them. It has become so much a part of their pre-race ritual that they cannot imagine a horse being able to run without it. I can tell you right now, it is not going to wipe out your livelihood. We owners are going to keep providing you with horses to train. Trainers will become better in managing their environments that these horses live in. Vets will become better in managing the underlying pathology that leads to bleeding. The horses will run just as good as they did in an earlier time, and they will recover more quickly and run more often. The sky will not fall, and we will have taken an important step in regaining public confidence and saving our industry. Thank you.